Hey everybody, it's Anna and welcome back to my booktube channel. This video is going to be my Geekly wrap-up for January 13th through 19th. This week I read 8 books and I played 2 new board games. So let's go ahead and do the books first. The first book that I read was actually an ebook. It was the Uncanny Magazine issue number 31, which is the November-December 2019 issue. This one was kind of a roundup of a lot of the short fiction that had won awards this year that had been published in Uncanny or by that group. And most of it was actually this novella that was really an interesting story about like a time-traveling murder mystery. I didn't love it as much as I usually tend to love these, but I think that's just because that was just how this month was. So I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. Then I read a memoir that was really amazing. It's called Becoming Eve, My Journey from Ultra-Orthodox Rabbi to Transgender Woman by Abby Chava Stein. So Abby Stein is a woman that was born into basically like a royal family of Hasidic rabbis, which is like a really conservative sect of Judaism. Most Hasidic people live in New York. Oh, computer's making fun noises. And from a very young age, she always knew that she was a girl. Problem is, nobody else in her family was really on board with that, and she didn't have the words to describe or explain what she was going through to anybody at the time. I remember first learning about Abby Stein because I was watching a video interview with her where she talked about how she first began her process of transition. So like at the time she didn't even speak English because the Hasidic community is so insulated and like isolated from the rest of the world that she had to go to like a public bathroom to be able to access Wi-Fi, and then she had to Google like boy turns into a girl in Hebrew because she didn't really have any access to information in English or really know how to speak English at all. Hi, Gemma. Hey. So this book was a really amazing read. It was a very personal story of her life and her faith and her journey with her own gender and coming to a place where she's able to live her truth. I thought that it was super incredible, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It definitely does come with some trigger warnings for discussion of things like, you know, misgendering, transphobia, gender dysphoria, etc. But that's kind of what I think you would expect from a memoir about somebody who is transgender in our society, because these are all things that exist and are very prevalent. So definitely would recommend that book if you're interested at all. Okay, then I read a middle grade book called The Forgotten Girl by India Hill Brown. I didn't actually realize until I picked this up that India is a booktuber, and I was like, wait, why does this author look so familiar? I'm like, oh, it's because I watch your booktube channel. And I read this book as part of my challenge to read 30 books by Black authors this year. So this is a middle grade story that is about a young girl who is called Iris and her best friend Daniel. And one day they are out playing in the snow and they stumble upon a seemingly forgotten, abandoned gravesite, and it leads them to this kind of historical mystery of their town about back in the days when, which is really not that long ago. I shouldn't say back in the days because it was like when my dad was a little kid, when segregation was still very prevalent throughout the United States. There were segregated graveyards, and then during the Great Migration, when a lot of Black folks moved to more northern states for better economic opportunities, oftentimes these graveyards were left forgotten, and the white people that stayed behind didn't do anything to take care of the graves because they didn't care. And this is the story of what happens when you forget a small girl's grave. It is creepy, it is scary, it has really important things to say about race and memory and listening to family stories. Again, I have kind of a theme this year where I'm really enjoying books that are all about listening to family stories. I thought that this was really excellent, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Alright, then I read a book that one of my friends lent me that was Rebel of the Sands by Alwyn Hamilton, and this is a book that was a little bit like opening up a time capsule. I'm not going to hold it up the whole time because I don't have the dust jacket, but it was a little bit like opening up a time capsule and traveling back in time to what the state of YA was in 2016, because that was when this book was published. It's very tropey. It has a lot of the sort of like lost princess, secret royalty, the love interest is secretly a prince, there's rebels, there's, I don't know, like it's a very specific time in YA literature, and a lot of those tropes are still present in YA today, but like it's evolved so much since then, and so have my like tastes in reading YA as well, that I was just kind of like, oh, this is interesting. But what I did like about this book was that it takes place in a sort of like Persian mythology inspired world. The main character is actually a gunslinger, so it has kind of the flavor of a frontier town or like an outlaw town, because she lives in this sort of hardscrabble place where a bunch of people are being press ganged to work in a munitions factory for the Empire, and then there's a rebellion that's going on, and there's also a lot of like magical creatures and jinni and stuff like that from Persian folklore and mythology, and that part of it was really interesting. The story, it was okay, so I gave the book overall 3 out of 5 stars. Let's see. Okay, so the next book I finished was actually the audiobook that I listened to, which again was part of my Read 30 Books by Black Authors, and this was Let Me Hear a Rhyme by Tiffany D. Jackson. This is a story about 3 friends, Jasmine, Quadir, and Jarrell, and it opens with them mourning the death of their friend Steph under unexplained circumstances. They're all like high school age, maybe like 15 to 17, and Steph was murdered and no one was actually able to find who the murderer was. The other thing about Steph is that he really loved rap and hip hop, and he was, you know, making all of these tapes and whatnot in hopes to sign to a record label and become a musician. This takes place like in the late 90s, by the way, so it is also, sidebar, really weird to read something that's like a contemporarily written YA story that like takes place before teenagers today were even alive, but it's when you were alive, and I'm like, wow, I'm feeling some kind of way about this. So they decide, his friends, that they are going to basically like keep his legacy going by signing his music to a record label, even though he is already dead. They think, if Biggie can do it, why can't we? So they decide that they are going to basically like create this secret persona for him and try and get his music out there and into the world. And of course, nothing is ever that, but I thought that this book was very good. It wasn't perfect, but it was very, very, very close. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, mainly because I think that the character of Jarrell was kind of underdrawn. Like, he was a little underdeveloped for me. But I did really enjoy listening to it as an audiobook. This was the first time I ever listened to an audiobook that was multicast. So since there's 4 different points of view, they actually had 4 actors reading each of those parts, and I really enjoyed that. That was interesting, that was something new and different, and I ultimately gave the book 4 out of 5 stars. Okay, then I read the first book that I was ever sent by a subscriber, which came late last year, and that was The Familiars by Stacey Halls. This is a historical fiction story that follows a main character whose name is Fleetwood Shuttleworth. This book already wins the award for like most inventive and creative and funky names I have ever read in a book on that alone, but it gets better. Everyone in this book has some kind of whack-ass name. It's amazing. But basically, yeah, Fleetwood Shuttleworth is a 17-year-old woman who got married very, very young. This takes place in like the 1630s, so yeah, that was kind of the norm back then. She gets married very, very young, and she has already had 3 miscarriages, and she's really desperate to give her husband an heir because basically that's what her entire worth to him is predicated upon, because that's what women were for at this point in time. And so she's finally gotten pregnant again, and she is really terrified that she's going to have another miscarriage. So she hires a woman who is her same age, also 17, named Alice Gray, to basically be her midwife and help her through her like carrying and delivering a child. And this also coincides with the historical fiction part of the story, which is the Pendle witch trials, which were real-life witch trials that are kind of notable in history because it's one of the few witch trials that took place during this time period in which someone was actually acquitted, but then everybody else was condemned and executed. So this is a story about the friendship between women, the difficulties of women in marriage, especially in this time period. It's about the actual real motivations behind witch trials, which is to say that, like, no one really believes in this book that, like, the supernatural is real. It's not that kind of witch trial book. But this book does actually explore and interrogate the sort of opportunistic reasons that you might want to call someone a witch back then. This is something that I studied when I was in school, and like, it's not entirely a coincidence that almost every single woman who was ever accused of being a witch was someone who was independently wealthy and then was accused by someone who stood to benefit from her death, because they were either entitled to seize her land as a landlord, or they were distantly related and male, and therefore the person who would be next in line. And this book actually does bring that to your attention, which I think is something that not a lot of people actually know about witch trials. So that was super interesting to me. I ended up giving this book 4 out of 5 stars. There were some things that I thought were just a little bit predictable, and so I was just like, but it was really, really good. I enjoyed it quite a lot. All right, then I finished the second book in the Nameless City series, which is The Stone Heart by Faith Erin Hicks. Because this is a sequel, I'm not going to give away too much about the plot, but like the first book, it was super excellent. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It continues the story of Rat and Kai and their mission to try and get the Nameless City to be a place of peace instead of just war and conquering. And that's all I'm going to say about that, because holy hell, some serious stuff happens in this book. I've already started reading the third one, and this is a series that I am trying to make myself read super slowly, but it's really, really hard. So there we are. And then the last book that I read this week was Trans Love, an anthology of transgender and non-binary voices, edited by Freya Benson. This was the pick for January for the NB Book Club, which is an Instagram book club that is so yeah, this is an online book club that is hosted over on Instagram, and it was created by Jessie from Bow Ties and Books, and this was the January pick for that book club. This is the first time that I actually read the book club pick in the month that we picked to read it, and I thought it was okay. I ended up giving it a 3 out of 5, mainly because I think that when I read an anthology, there has to be a really good reason for everything in the anthology to be sort of collected and collated together. And for this, I feel like just saying that everyone contributing was going to write about love was a bit too vague. And maybe that was the point. Maybe the editor was going for something that was super subjective and open to interpretation, but it just didn't really do it for me. And unfortunately, also the quality of the pieces that were submitted were kind of all over the place. Some of them I thought were really good and really stand out and are going to stick with me, but just as many of them were just kind of forgettable. So like, definitely as a non-binary person, I think it's super important that this kind of thing exists. I was very impressed that there was sort of like equal page time given to trans and non-binary folks, none of this like artificial pitting us against each other. I also appreciated the fact that the contributors were a very racially diverse group. But I think that just overall the experience of reading this book was not quite what I wanted. And that was maybe due to some of the like form and style choices. So I'm glad that I read it, and I think that if you're interested in these topics, you should check it out. But for me, it was 3 out of 5, which is like solid middle of the road. Then I have one more thing here that's not a book before we get into the games, but I was very kindly sent this amazing book sleeve by Michelle, who's Thor Wants Another Letter on BookTube, who's one of the co-hosts of the Indigathon, and this was because I won, like, basically a drawing for people that supported the Indigathon a lot on social media, and she actually made this by hand. So it's a book sleeve that can fit, I think I've been able to fit like 3 books in here so far, and it's got like the Hogwarts crest fabric on the outside, and then on the inside the little like Harry Potter and the font that's on the cover of the books. And I just love this. So thank you so much, Michelle. I wanted to make sure that I included that this week because this week is when I got it and I've loved using it so far. All right, now let's go ahead and get into the board games. So we had a couple of board game nights this week. The first game that we played during one of those is called Wavelength. This is kind of a new party type game, I suppose, that is basically about arguing things as they exist along a spectrum. So I'm going to just illustrate this here. So Wavelength comes with this little dial. And there is one person on each team who is a psychic that is giving clues and trying to get you to guess things, and everyone else is trying to guess. So the psychic can secretly roll this white thing around here, and there's a little wedge. You're trying to get your team to guess right in the middle of this wedge because that gives them the most number of points. So you secretly do that, you look and see where the wedge is, and then you draw a card. The card's going to give you two opposites. This one says friend or enemy. So you are trying to give your team a clue to guess something that would fall like this area along friend or enemy. So definitely more toward the friend side than the enemy side, but not all the way. Then you cover it up after you've taken a look at it, and then this little red dial, your teammates will move as they try and guess based off of the clue that you've given them where the answer falls along that spectrum. The concept behind this game is really simple. The execution behind this game is really fun, especially if you, like me, have a group of strongly opinionated friends that know each other really, really well. We had a wonderful time playing this. I think that this is going to be one of the sort of favorite social games of the year. And then we also played a game called JustOne, which I had only played one time before. This is another sort of game that you can play with a big group that could very easily be described as a filler game, but I think actually just makes a really enjoyable gaming experience in and of itself. It's kind of a similar game where there's one person who's guessing based off of clues that everyone gives them. So the guesser gets a list of words. They get to choose a number 1 through 5, and that picks a random word. Say that the random word is like crocodile. Then everybody else has to give a series of one-word clues that they all write down secretly to get that person to guess crocodile. Then that person who's guessing has to cover their eyes when you reveal what you have written down. If you've written down the same thing as any of the other players, you're all disqualified from giving clues that round. So basically this is like you're trying to come up with a clue that's really unique, but also like that they'll get, so it can't be super common though, otherwise your clue is going to get discarded. This one is also a lot of fun. Mainly, I think it's more fun when you are not the guesser, which you spend most of your time actually not guessing, because I love that feeling of suspense when you think you've written down a really good clue, see someone else has written it down, and then you're like, ah, why? I did so well. So we really enjoyed playing both of those. And that is going to do it for this week's Geekly Wrap-Up. Have you read any of the books that I have read here or played any of the board games? Comment down below if you have, or tell me about something that you really enjoyed reading or playing this week. If you like this video and you'd like to see more of what I do, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. That is the best way to get updated every time I post new videos. As always, thank you all so very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!